Hello, everyone. It is another Friday. It's Friday, August 28th, 2020, somehow. And it's another Experience Investigators Ask Me Anything webinar. I'm Jeannie Walters. Welcome. We are always glad to see you. And as you see there, we do this every Friday that we can, and we always welcome you from all over the world. So as you come join us today, we're going to be talking about how to build your CX success statement. And I'm going to try not to mess that up every time I say it, because CX success statement is a lot of S's, but we're going to get through it together. So I'll be sharing some ideas on how you can do this for your organization. And then just like every Friday, this is an Ask Me Anything. So literally ask away about this topic or whatever else is on your mind around customer experience. And feel free to do that in the chat. Feel free to drop in questions. And at the end of this, at the end of the presentation, we will go through those questions and get through as many as we possibly can within the hour that we have together. So if you would like reminders to join us every week, go ahead and check out bit.ly/CX Weekly, and you can sign up for reminders of when we do this on LinkedIn Live and YouTube. And if you are watching the replay, feel free to drop in questions there too, because we do our best to go back and make sure we answer those as well. So if you're watching this later and have anything to ask, feel free to drop that in as well. And as always, I'm here with you today. I'm Jeannie Walters. You can learn more about me at experienceinvestigators.com, as well as connect with me on LinkedIn or all these other places. I love hearing from you on Twitter. And then as always, we have David with us. David is here to help moderate. Hi, David.
Hey, everybody.
And, we love to hear where you're joining us from. So feel free to drop that in the chat. Let us know, where are you today and how are you joining us today? And if you are willing to share, I think we're all looking for recommendations on what to binge right now. So if you have good recommendations for binge-worthy shows that you've been into, maybe that can be a weekend recommendation for everybody. We just finished up Ozark, the 3 seasons of Ozark on Netflix, which was great and, gripping. So that was kind of fun as an adult show. And then with my 2 teenagers, we've been watching, and I will admit, this is my 3rd time going through this show, but it's Parks and Recreation. And my kids, I think I'm a version of Leslie Knope, which I take as a compliment. So how about you, David? What have you been watching?
I have 1 episode left of Schitt's Creek. We've gotten right to the finale, and I don't want to watch it because I don't want it to end.
Great show.
But otherwise, my wife is a big fan of Lucifer, so their latest season just came out on Netflix, and she's been binging that, and I kind of pop in and out and see what ridiculousness is happening.
I don't know that show, but it sounds like it would be ridiculous in all sorts of the best ways.
It is. So we've got Tyler here, huddled up in the back of a Panera in Colorado. I appreciate that you're here, Tyler. We've got folks from Malaysia, Toronto. Tyler says, watch the Umbrella Academy. We've got Bournemouth, UK, New Hampshire. So all over the place.
Wow. Thank you guys so much.
Nigeria.
Ooh, Nigeria, Portugal. Wow. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It always means a lot to us to see people from all over the world who are really dedicated to creating great experiences for their customers. So thanks for joining us again. And Tyler, always good to see you here. I love that we've created this community now and that we have regulars. It feels like an old reference, but it feels like Cheers, where everybody knows your name. That's really fun. So welcome, everybody. I'm Jeannie Walters. For those of you who don't know me, I've been in the customer experience field for about 20 years. I have to stop saying that. It's actually been over 20 years, more than 20 years. I have to just embrace that. And, what I try to do is create fewer ruined days for customers by guiding clients and advising, consulting, training, workshops, that type of thing. And like most of you, I've been spending a lot of time at home. This is my home office, and I've been doing a lot of these things virtually, which has been really cool because we can do different things than when we're all in person. So it's kind of forced me to get more creative and try new things and innovate, and it's been really fun. So we are thrilled that you're here with us today. Today, we're talking about a CX success statement. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is following up on last week, we talked about how to build goals around this idea of SMARC, which is social, measurable, inspiring, relevant, and contextual. But once we get those goals, how do we know if they're really going to guide us down that path to success? And as we talk about these things, I want you to consider, what are your top CX goals? Because what happens is when I ask leaders these questions, I get a lot of calls that start with things like, we really just want to focus on the customer more. We know that customer experience is important and we don't really know where to start. Or sometimes it's a CX leader who's been newly installed in that position and they look around and think, well, what am I really supposed to do here if nobody's giving direction except for these types of nebulous ideas? So when I ask about this, a lot of times what I hear is, you know what, we want to listen to our customers. We want to respond to them more. We want to create feedback loops that make more sense. Or they say things like, we want to create these wow experiences. We know that's so important. So let's create wow experiences. How do we do that? And then the other one is kind of this idea of let's just create an all-around great customer experience. That's what we're aiming to do. Let's do it. And those are all well-intentioned, wonderful goals. I don't want to take away from that. They are, we should all aspire to these things. We should all have wow goals. We should listen and get back to our customers. Absolutely. We should do all these things. But if that's what we define as the role of customer experience, and if that's how we set up CX leaders, then there's no way to really measure that success. There's no way to really say, okay, what do we need to achieve these things in a defined way? And so what a CX success statement identifies is, what specific outcomes will be the most meaningful? What are we really going for here? How are those specific outcomes tying back to the larger organizational goals and our leadership goals as well? And I'll talk about the difference there in a minute. And then we also need metrics, right? We need to know how we're going to measure success. We need to understand what are we really defining, how are we measuring it, and how can we tie that back to our overall organizational success. But here's the asterisk. We need to be realistic about this. We need to make sure that we understand our own limitations, our restrictions, the obstacles that we have, so that we can go in with either eyes wide open saying, we know that these are obstacles, here's what we're doing about them. Or we can say, you know what, we've got to scale back a little bit to be realistic about this. So to help you with this, not only do we have the blog, but we have a workbook for you. And the workbook can be downloaded. We're going to give you the link at the end of this. But it's really there to help you think through these questions, to really help you define all these different pieces of your CX success statement. And my goal here is to help you succeed. And so if you can create the success statement and share it and get everybody on board with that, that's what guides customer experience forward in your organization. So let's get started today. What we're going to talk about today are these 5 ideas to their steps really to create this success statement. The first one, you've got to identify those top organizational goals. The next one is about identifying the goals for each leader in your organization. Then we want to determine your organization's top customer experience specific outcomes and make sure that we understand how those relate back to all these other things. Again, we want to measure these things, so we need to choose the right metrics to measure success. And then we need to do that reality check. Will this work? And if not, what can we do about it? So we're going to put it all together. So the first thing that we've talked about a lot in these last few weeks is really understanding your organizational goals. Because a lot of times what happens is we are told as CX leaders, go do CX, create those wow experiences. And then we say, well, what is that here? What is a wow experience? It might be different from one organization to another. We have to understand who are we and as an organization, and what's the vision? Where are we trying to go? And I've worked with quite a few companies who have not figured this out, I will be honest. And so if we can, ask our leadership of the organization, what is the vision? What are our goals? And get those down. That's kind of the North Star for us. We have to make sure that everything we're doing supports the organizational goals. So an organizational goal might be something like, in the next 2 years, we're going to earn 10% more of the market, or we're going to increase revenue by 5%. So if we know those specific goals, then we know, okay, revenue is really critical. Increasing in revenue is really critical. We know that's an organizational goal. Organizational goals also show up in more of a visionary way. So you might hear things like, we're going to be the leader in this market, or the leader in this industry. And again, I think those are noble goals, but we have to define what that really looks like. But if you know that that's part of the mission and part of the organizational goal, then again, that can help guide you as you move forward in defining your CX success. And then we want to confirm our leadership goals. And the reason that I have come to the conclusion we need to do this is because a lot of CX leaders have told me, and I've witnessed, where every single time that we are asked to talk about results, we actually have to justify it. We actually have to rationalize why we're there, why we're talking about CX in the first place. Because in many leadership teams, this is a new idea. And when we think about business overall, and some of you have heard me say this before, but business plans don't talk about customer experience. Traditional business was not set up necessarily to serve customers first. It was set up to serve shareholders first. It was about profit. Of course, we need profit in business, but we also need to make sure that we are delivering for our customers and creating a great experience. These are somewhat new concepts. And so we have to keep coming back and explaining why we're here, why we're really focused on this, and why we're investing in customer experience. If you can start identifying which leaders are invested and what are they really invested in, your chief marketing officer might be, I've had CMOs tell me, well, I'm a branding guy. And what does that really mean? Well, that means that they want the brand reputation to rise above. They want that people to recognize the brand all over the world, maybe, or things like that. Your chief financial officer might be really interested in, cutting costs across your organization. Your chief operating officer might be talking a lot about increasing efficiencies. You want to make sure you understand their specific goals. What are they accountable for, and how that all ties back to customer experience as well. But take a minute and try to identify, okay, what do these leaders really care about? What are their goals? And if you can start identifying their top goals, that will help you as you move forward through this process as well. And then you want to kind of put these together. So you want to take your organizational goals and you want to look at those leadership goals. And that's how you come out with specific outcomes. So what I like to do is look at, okay, organizationally, we know that, we want to grow, we want to increase revenue 10% in the next 2 years, let's say. Well, we know that the chief operating officer has talked about increasing efficiency over the next 2 years as well. So what does that tell us? That tells us that those two things are really important. Oh, look at that. The CFO wants to reduce cost, and increasing efficiency will reduce cost. So you can start putting these things together and zeroing in on what are really, really important goals to your overall organization and to the leaders that need to execute on them. And once you have that, that can start guiding you. And so, if it's about reducing cost, you can start thinking, okay, how can we deliver on this in a customer experience way? Well, what if we reduced common complaints? What if we looked at, okay, what if we identified these are the most common complaints? This is what drives in inbound calls to our contact center, to our chat bots, all of those things. If we could reduce that, then that would help us increase efficiency. It would help us reduce cost, and it would help us get to that goal of achieving more in the market. Because guess what? If we can retain customers, if we can increase customer lifetime value, then we can actually show that we're earning that revenue over time. So that's where I want you to really put on your thinking cap and look at, okay, where are these overlaps and how can we support that through the actions and behaviors of the customer experience team and the leadership there. And then we have to define that even more. We have to get into, okay, how do we measure this? So if we've defined that we want to increase revenue, we want to increase efficiencies, and we say, okay, we're going to do that by reducing complaints, by improving the experience in order to reduce common complaints and in order to reduce friction for our customers, then how do we measure that? Well, we can measure that through how many people, digitally, you might want to start looking at goal completion rate. How many customers get stuck in certain places? And if you fix it, how many of them complete that goal? Well, what that tells you is they're not calling in, they're not having that complaint again, and they're able to carry on with what they're doing. You can also start looking at contact center metrics. How many calls are coming in about that specific complaint? How many first call resolutions do you have? All of those things, and start really looking at, are we being as efficient as we possibly can be in this role, as well as serving the customer better so that they then turn around and, stay customers longer with you. You can start looking at that, retention rates, churn rates, all of these things that are loyalty metrics. Really start connecting the dots with, okay, we've got these organizational goals, these leadership goals, and now we're going to start measuring our success against that. That's how you start building your case for investment into customer experience. And here's the reality check. We have to make sure that we are looking at, is this doable? And are we taking on too much? Because here's what happens with customer experience. It's such a big umbrella, right? You guys know this. It's such a big umbrella that it's super easy for other leaders to say, oh, customer experience, that's a customer experience thing. Oh, they're complaining about my marketing campaign. Customer experience will take care of that because that's their department. And when you look at what sort of accountability do you have, what sort of cross-functional leadership is there to invest in creating the change that you need in order to get the metrics that you want, in order to get those specific outcomes and help build on those goals, then you need to actually define that. You need to say, these are the obstacles that we are facing. These are the limitations we have. But instead of stopping there, I want you to think about, what would it look like if you didn't have those things? And how can you overcome it? Is it resources? Is it investment? Is it partnership? Is it collaboration? Define that in your CX success statement, because then you can make the case for it. You can start saying, okay, we want to do this. We want to get these outcomes to support our organizational goals and your leadership goals, Madam Leader. And getting people involved can actually, help you overcome those obstacles together. But you have to define it, because otherwise, this is how CX is set up for failure sometimes. We're given a lot of investigative power, but we're not given the accountability to actually change anything. And so we start reporting the same feedback over and over, and everybody's scratching their head saying this CX thing really isn't working, because we don't have the accountability or authority to actually make the changes. So I've seen this done a couple different ways, where sometimes we have top line where we can say, okay, this is what we've discovered through our feedback and through the measurements that we're doing. Can you please fix this certain department? Sometimes we don't. And my favorite model is a cross-functional leadership team who cares enough about CX to help guide these changes. But again, not everybody is there yet. So look at where you are in your own maturity, in your own journey, and just the culture of your organization, and articulate that. And that will help you overcome those limits and those obstacles as well. So when we put this all together, this is essentially what it is. It's defining, our organization will be dedicated to achieving these CX outcomes, and define those. And then we want to mention how those outcomes serve our broader organizational goals, including XYZ. And then we also want to mention those leadership goals and say, we heard I always like to start with the CEO, right? But sometimes the CEO says things like, we're going to get there one customer at a time. And if they're saying that, then that tells you that they want to build more customers. They want to acquire more customers. How will this help? Well, maybe you'll get more referrals. Maybe you'll get more, you'll create a customer advocacy program. That could be a great goal for that, because then they actually will start preaching for you throughout their networks and communities. So you start tying those things together too. And then this is how we'll measure it and be very straightforward about this. And then this is kind of just that reality gut check of this is realistic and attainable. We can do this. Now, I know sometimes CX leaders push back on this and say, yeah, but if we don't know if we can, why should we define all this? You can do this a couple different ways, but I really believe that defining success, it's just like every other part of business. I mean, you can't have a whole marketing department working all the time creating beautiful campaigns and then you start looking around thinking, well, what did that do? It didn't do any lead generation. We didn't actually achieve what we were setting out to achieve with marketing. That wouldn't happen. And so even if they fall short of their goals, there is still something to measure to start looking at, figuring out, are we successful or not? The same has to happen with customer experience. Otherwise, it's too easy for somebody to look around and think, well, we tried it, it didn't work, let's move on. And that's happening right now to CX leaders and CX teams. They are being cut, the budgets are going away, all those things. And this is what I think could start proactively protecting us against that, because if we can make the case, then everybody understands that our success as CX leaders is not just about our customer success, it's about our organizational success as well. So, this can sound kind of like a theory, but really this is tangible and accountable. And what I like about putting it into this form of documentation is that you can then refer back to it. You can get it approved. You can say, you know what, the CEO signed off on this, everybody signed off on this. And if they start pushing back on, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do this is the year, because that's what happens to CX. You can say, okay, let's talk about what our priorities are. This is how we're measuring success this year. How do you propose I pull in another goal when we have the same resources, the same limitations, and we're going to, then shift our focus away from the specific outcomes that we all agreed to. So it's a touchstone. It's something that you can refer back to. If you're not ready to bring this to your C-suite, because I've heard that too, start with where you can. Start, do it for yourself, do it for your team, and then start introducing it to different leaders. Start, asking for time and saying, this is where we're going. How can we work together to make sure that we achieve these organizational goals together? Because I want to support what you're doing, COO, and I want to support what you're doing, CMO, and all these different people. So I think that if we can build those coalitions throughout leadership and they understand what success really is, then you're going to have that support as people start throwing stuff at you and saying, you've got to shift gears and you've got to do this and that. So as promised, we have a workbook for you that we're going to share at the end of this. And that will help you actually walk through this. But for now, I would love to hear if we have questions, comments. As always, I'm all ears. So what are we hearing?
Hey, so first, I just want to say hey to a few people who came in just a couple minutes late. Saptarshi, great to see you. We've got Laura in Florida. We've got Antonia in Minneapolis. So great to see you all. I want to call out a couple of comments. In the chat, there was a bit of a discussion around getting that leadership buy-in. And if you were on the call last week, you might remember us talking about SMRC goals. Mm-hmm. And, that R was for relevant. How can we present these goals in a way that's relevant to our leaders so that they do buy in? So a couple comments that I just wanted to point out that I think are great. Jackson said that I find it great to map the various leaders and their personal motives. It's a lot like project management. You need to be able to alter the dialogue for various executives. And that's completely right on. When you check out the worksheet, you'll see that there's actually a section to list out your leaders and list out their goals. And if you want to, you can even list out kind of their motivations behind those goals. And it's a great way to have a quick accounting of how do we need to present these to our leaders. Yep. Luis also added, it's important not only to understand your CXO business objectives, but also personal objectives, often not the same thing. So that's a good point as well.
Yeah. I would love to add to that if I could.
Please do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's also important not to necessarily assume. I think sometimes we assume leadership, personal goals, and then when you actually sit down and talk to them, they actually reveal very different things. So that's why I love this idea of coalition building, because if you can really sit down with somebody and or Zoom in today's world, Zoom with somebody and say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What do you think is the best for this organization? You can really start getting at what is personally motivating them. There are people who are motivated by climbing the ladder. There are people who are motivated by doing the right thing. There are people who are motivated by being the contrarian, the challenger. And so if you can identify those things, that can be super, super helpful. I would just encourage everybody to really take the time to build those coalitions, because that's when you start really getting to know people and building the trust that you need, as well as really understanding what they're about. Because I think it's sometimes we see something from the outside and we think, oh yeah, they're climbing the ladder. That's what they're interested in. When you sit down and talk to them, it's like, no, they're really about doing the right thing, because they have a very personal story about how this company has been so important to them for all these years, or something like that. So I just encourage you to sit down and really reach out, because the other thing is people love to be heard. Leaders are no different. So reach out and say, I just want to listen. I just want to hear what you're about, so that we can serve you better, serve this organization better, and achieve these goals together. So it's a great point, Louise. Thank you for bringing that up.
And we've got some good questions coming into the chat, but first I want to start with one that came in from Tyler via email earlier in the week. And despite this coming in like 5 days ago, it is prophetic. It is completely on topic
Way to
of what
go,
we're talking
Tyler.
about right now. So Tyler, I guess, saw this live session before and knew that we were going to be talking about this. But he asks, we talk a lot about C-suite buy-in, but sometimes you have C-suite buy-in and still struggle because the people who have to do the work are 3 or more levels removed.
Mhm.
So when we talk to these people, a lot of times we can talk about long-term ROI, but these people are being judged on this year's profit and loss. So how do
Mhm.
we bridge that gap?
Ah, such a good question. Yeah, I think this comes down to, taking these ideas and actually applying them to those teams that you need to work with. So figure out, what is most important? What are the short-term gains you can make this year? Sometimes it is about explaining that long-term vision, but then saying, in order to get there this year, this is what we're doing. And ask them, how can you support what they're doing? How can the CX work that you're putting into place and the efforts that that you and your team are doing can support what their goals are, their outcomes are? But I will say here that sometimes that's an uphill battle. And one of the things I've seen that can be effective is going back to that specific leader, right? Like if they report into the chief digital officer, going to as high as you can get in that ranking and saying, I need help in order to achieve these goals that we agreed to. Because if you have that C-suite buy-in, they've basically said, yes, this is a good idea. We need to go forth, and just go to the leadership that you can and say, I need your help here, because they're worried about their short-term goals, which they should be. How can we provide some sort of accountability so that, they know that this is important as well, and that they will get credit for it. They will get the rewards that they need in order to shift their investments around, shift their resources around in some cases. So it's really the job of the CX leader. So much of it is about building those, areas of trust, so that we can then go back to the folks who need to do the work, exactly what you're talking about, in order to make these changes. I would also one of the things that I've done in the past that I like is every so often, this isn't true in every single team, but sometimes you can identify somebody on a team who kind of gets it and who wants to be there for you. I like to deputize those people and kind of pull them aside and say, "Hey, I need you to be my CX champion," and maybe take them out to lunch or send them a gift card or something, and say, every time that this stuff comes up, How can we work together? How can we work with your team? How can you introduce the idea of CX into these projects before we get too late, before we are trying to fix something? How, if there's work that you need done, that's another way too, is say, hey, I need your help. How can we do this? What makes sense to you? And so it might not be the leader. It might be a junior project manager on the team. That's okay. But I think there are people who inherently get this stuff and they're throughout your organization. And if you can identify them and nurture that, then that can be a way to get in as well. But I also totally understand the pressure of that short-term P&L responsibility. And so I think that, calling that out and saying, I know that this is what's most important. If we don't take these steps, if we don't invest short term right now for those long term gains that we're looking for, then we're going to be even further behind. Then we're going to start seeing more pain and start identifying what will happen if you don't move forward. That can be powerful as well. But it's a real challenge. So I feel you, Tyler. It's just I think that we need to build those coalitions, build that trust, and then again, look for the people who get it. They're huge advocates for us. If we can really take them into the fold, they can help a lot too.
We've got a couple more hellos here. I'm not in the
Yay.
chat, so I'm saying them on camera today. A tool is on YouTube. Hey, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
We've got Anish on LinkedIn coming from Singapore. Abdullah from Saudi Arabia. Great to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. I want to jump to a question from Jackson next. So Jackson asks, do you ever experience struggles within departments as expectations or as responsibilities are taken from a department in order to create better customer experience? So the example he gives is onboarding is taken away from the sales team and reallocated to onboarding specialists,
Mhm.
while some executives fear these shifts because change is
Mhm.
scary.
Change is scary. And people don't like to lose control, right? Like
Mhm.
that's another thing. So yeah, I think this comes down to really understanding the customer journey and communicating that. And, one of the things I talked about last week was making sure that it's social, that your goals are all social, because we need to make sure that we are communicating the story and the hard truths of customer experience in ways that it's easy to ignore sometimes if you're head down in a department and this is what we do, right? We do onboarding. So there you go. But if you can show them, like, even if you have pilot programs where you can say, hey, look at this, by using an onboarding specialist, we found that our customer ratings went up, our customer sat or our NPS or things like that. After we onboarded them, they were happier, they were more engaged. Maybe the product usage went up, all of these different ways that we can kind of measure, did we do a good job with onboarding or not? And it's not because sales did a bad job. It's because, you know what? It's a lot. And it was too much. Your job in sales, there's a lot to do. By taking this away, we are actually providing a better experience for the customer, and we can prove that. And you know what? If product usage goes up, retention goes up. And so start connecting those dots with, okay, if these things happen, then that's good for all of us. Then we are going to meet those organizational goals. Then we are going to meet those revenue goals, chief revenue officer. So that's how I would approach it, is really looking at what is the story? Like why was that decision made? It wasn't made because anybody did anything wrong. It was made because we learned, because we listened, because we were actively gathering that feedback and responding to it. Our job is to do that, is to act on that feedback. And so experiment and pilot and see if you can find those short-term wins, and then share that back with the team that might be feeling a little left out. And yes, executives will resist change. That is a given. And they think that by giving something up, they're losing power. And so communication is really, really important. Start showing those leaders, hey, thank you so much for working with us on this. Look what's happening. Our ratings are going up. This is great. And hey, how can we make sure to get more referrals going back to sales? Let's work on something like that together, so that you can take some of the things that were the resources and the investment that was taken away and start reapplying it in creative and different ways that works for everybody. So that's how I do it. But yeah, sometimes it's storytelling. We really have to tell the right story.
I want to share a comment from Patrice. Patrice, always good to see you.
Mhm.
It tells a story that makes me happy. She just says, "This is so timely for me and my team, and I'm thankful for my organization that we've been able to keep everyone on board during the crisis."
Mm. Oh, yay. That's a good comment. Thank you for sharing that, Patrice.
I'm glad that this is timely for you.
Yeah, and it's
Uh,
optimistic. I love that.
yeah, yeah. Let's jump to a question from Luis. This is an interesting sort of thought experiment here. Do you think that the CX success statement, or maybe something that amends the CX success statement, should refer to the non-financial purpose of the company,
Mm,
why the company is really in business?
mhm. Wow, well, that's a perfect segue. And thank you, Luis, for that, because next week, we're gonna be talking about your customer experience mission, and that's really what ties together what sort of experience are we delivering, and how does that tie back to the vision and the purpose of the company? And I think that the reason I separate those two ideas is because sometimes the vision is kind of it's very aspirational and awesome, but it doesn't always talk about customers. It doesn't always define who are we? How can we show up to our customers? And that's what we're talking about tomorrow. So, or tomorrow, sorry, next week. And I think that there is a lot to say about that because your success statement should absolutely reflect that in kind of the spirit and the tone. And one of the best ways to take that one step further is to have that customer experience mission statement as well. And when you put those two things together, that's really what becomes, you know what, this is who we are. These are the tenets of how we show up to customers and what we're trying to do. So when I've worked with organizations where they have a pretty clear purpose, but they don't necessarily have those specific goals. So they might have a purpose to be, the leading whatever or to provide the most effortless experience, but they haven't defined that in specific goals. So that's where we start and we say, okay, what does that mean for customer experience and how can we live up to that? And so I like to kind of look at both those bigger visions and missions of the company as well as those specific goals that they might have for the year, the 5-year plan, whatever, and that's where we really start, but sometimes, you have to just look at the purpose, you have to just start from there, but I love that you set that up so well, so now that's what we're talking about next week, so I hope you can join us next week.
Let's go to another question from Jackson here. Um, and this is kind of in the more practical terms of creating your CX success statement. Do you recommend creating a success statement annually with the C-suite? And then do you create a single success statement for the company or one for each stakeholder? We had another question come in via email that asked, should we have a different success statement for every key goal?
Mm.
So how do we divvy that up?
Yeah, some of this, it depends, my favorite consultant answer, but I think that when we are looking at this, it kind of depends on where you are in your own maturity as a customer experience team, as a customer-centric organization, like, how far are you in this process? Because in the beginning, you might have to start with 1 or 2 and really focus on those, and the 1 or 2 goals might be around, "You know what? This year, we just need to understand what our customers are really going through so that we can build better goals." So maybe the first year is about journey mapping and, setting up feedback mechanisms and a voice of the customer program. Those might be your goals for the year. But if you start moving ahead, that's when you start looking at what metrics matter and how you can track those and all of those things. So some of this depends on, where you are in your own maturity and what sort of team and resources do you have. You can't boil the ocean. And so when you are looking at how to set up success for yourself and your team, I would encourage you to think about, okay, that realistic gut check again. What is realistic here? Do we have enough people to really work through all of this? Do we have I mean, so much of what we do now is around looking at data. Do we have the right data scientists and analysts to support what we're trying to do? Do we have the right tools? Do we have all of those things? So, if you are trying to prioritize, should we do one or two? Should we try to appeal to all of our leaders? I would say look at your leadership, look at what they're saying, look who has the most influence and power. And I hate to say that so bluntly, but it's true. We need to start really understanding the organizations within which we are a part and understand, what the CEO is really focused on, the purpose of the organization. And that's what she loves to talk about. So make sure that's part of this. But then, the person who has her ear is the chief digital officer, and they're trying to do a lot around digital transformation, and that's a big goal for us in general. So then that's where I would start saying, what are we doing to support those goals, to support our organizational goals? And let's start there. And you can still, I still believe that understanding all the other leadership motivations, like really understanding what those are, can be super helpful no matter what, because we can't do this alone. We need everybody. And so that can still help you build those coalitions for those long-term strategies. But you may not be able to take on more than one or two. And so that's the point of this, is really getting realistic about what are we asking CX leaders to do and how are we measuring success. So that's where I would start. If you have a huge team and if you have all the resources in the world, first of all, good on you, because that's pretty rare. But I would also say, okay, then create 5 or 6 and figure out how can you appeal to all your leaders and how can you really get there. So this is not about, a one size fits all exactly. This is about helping you guys think through these questions, think through can we define this in a more tangible way so that we can set ourselves up for success and make sure everybody understands what success looks like.
If you've got any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to go to one more right now that came in from email. And in the blog post, you had talked about, combining, did it in the video or in today's session too, you're talking about combining the organizational goals and the leadership goals to get those larger outcomes. But what if those organizational goals and leadership goals don't really correlate?
That's an interesting question, because ideally they should, right? Like, you have to. I mean, there are so many metaphors about organizational leadership, but sometimes I think about it like a ship, right? Like if you've got the captain of the ship saying, we're going to Antarctica and everybody's paddling the other way, that's not going to work. That would be quite a paddle boat too, now that I think about it. But so, you have to kind of align those things no matter what, because otherwise that's not going to work. If you're struggling with that, if you're struggling with like, okay, this doesn't make sense. We're saying that we want to, I don't know, retain more customers overall, and that's our goal. And yet we also are not, we're taking away from product development and we're taking away from feedback or something like that. I would look at, again, that purpose that you have and start connecting the dots there. If everybody agrees to the purpose of your organization and what are you really there for? Why are you in business? Start there and then start looking at, okay, how do these different leadership goals align with that? And so, but I honestly think like if those aren't aligned, then you've got bigger problems because all the leaders have to be working toward those bigger organizational goals and the vision and the purpose and making sure that they're doing it in the right way. So I think that that's a bigger conversation, but that's how I would address that. I think is zero in on the purpose and see how your goals can really live up to that.
All right. Well, have we made everybody wait long enough for this workbook?
I know this is a little new for us. We're making you guys wait, but I mean,
Maybe sweat it out.
it's awesome to have this conversation and to really just see where everybody's coming from. And, I think CX is such a big umbrella, as I like to say, that it's important to just dig in every once in a while and talk about these things. So yes, we have for you the CX Success Statement Workbook. And I've said that CX success statement several times throughout this webinar, so I'm pretty proud of myself. But this workbook is available at bit.ly/CX-success-workbook. And really, this is about asking the questions and documenting all the things that we just talked about. What are your organizational goals? What are your leadership goals? How do those go together? How can you really put this into a formula so that you can measure that success? And then, are you being realistic about it? And so, hopefully, this will really help you guys talk about it in different ways, have that documentation of success, and really understand, what are we doing here? What does customer experience mean in our organization? How are we able to stay focused and prioritize the right things as all of those different things come at us from different leaders and different departments? And how, if we need to shift, how can we define success again? And so hopefully this really helps you build on, what we talked about today, but also really just sit down and think about it in different ways. Because if you can articulate this, this gives you the power, this gives you the control to really start saying to people, this is how we've defined success. This is what we're working on. This is where we are today. Let's, if you want to change that, that's a different discussion. And so I really hope that this provides the value that I think it will. And of course, we always love to hear back from you about if you're using it. Feel free to let us know what's working. Feel free to let me know if you were able to present to leadership and what happened and all of those things. We're always interested in hearing about how these things work for you. So, as a reminder, we do this every Friday. And so feel free to, again, sign up for reminders at bit.ly/CX weekly if you don't want to miss one. We talk about these different subjects every week. And next week, I will be talking about customer experience mission, which thankfully we got such a great segue about that. You guys heard me talk about that a little bit already. But that's really defining, what is the customer experience that we want to deliver every step of the way, and what's the end goal there? What are we trying to do for our customers? How do we show up? And so I'm really excited about that, because that's something that I've been passionate about for a long time. And I think as we move forward, I just want you guys to know that it means so much to us that you show up week after week, that you are here, that you reach out to me. I hear from many of you on email and Twitter and LinkedIn. That's always really fun, because our goal is, and the mission of my company is, to create fewer ruined days for customers. And I know by showing up here today, by asking these great questions, by really investing your own time, that you are doing that. And so you doing that is helping me live my mission. So I really, really appreciate that. And as always, we are interested in your feedback. What kind of customer experience professional would I be if I didn't ask for feedback, right? So you can tell us how we did, tell us what you want to hear about in future webinars at bit.ly/let Jeannie know. I'm Jeannie Walters. It's always my pleasure and honor to be here with you. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.